If a woman in a simple white dress, wearing faded shoes, walked into a place where Hermès ties and Chanel perfumes were almost an unspoken requirement to be welcomed, how would you look at her? Emma Carter stepped into the Avalon Chess Society, the beating heart of Manhattan's elite, as if she had no idea how much each square meter of this place was worth. But the prolonged silence in the lobby told a different story. Every gaze knew exactly, and they didn't like it one bit. Does she think this is a coffee shop? Chuckled a man in a tuxedo, not even bothering to cover his mouth. Or maybe she's looking for a public restroom? Murmured a middle-aged woman, twirling her glass of white wine. Brave, really. I wouldn't even wear that dress to the supermarket. Soft snickers broke out as if Emma had become a punchline in their private comedy show. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had heard words like that far too many times in her life, but no one had ever seen her answer through a chessboard. She walked to the reception desk, where politicians were usually greeted with both hands and a hearty handshake, but where she was now regarded as if she were a food delivery worker who had knocked on the wrong door. I'm here to meet Dr. Benjamin Clark. He is scheduled to meet me here at 8 o'clock. Ah, the receptionist offered a smile that touched only the upper lip, the rest of the face stiff, the kind of smile reserved for small, regrettable social accidents. He just called. He'll be running late. You can wait. However, I must— Oh no, never mind. As long as you don't accidentally sit at a VIP table. Emma nodded. She didn't need a special seat. She only needed a chair and a chessboard. She moved to a far corner of the chess room, where the lighting was just dim enough for no one to notice her, but not so dark as to make anyone uncomfortable. She sat quietly, hands folded together, eyes following the ongoing games, with such unwavering focus that Richard Hale, the most powerful man in the room, began to feel a strange discomfort, simply because she did not see herself as lesser. Richard Hale sat like a king on his throne at the center of the lavish Avalon Chess Society, where each chessboard cost more than a regular person's monthly salary, and every glance carried an unspoken message of status. As the 7-time reigning champion, Richard didn't just play chess, he dominated it. To him, chess was no longer a game of intellect, but a tool to maintain the social order he desired. Who sat above, who stayed below, who deserved a seat, and who should merely watch. From the moment Emma walked in, Richard had his eye on her, not because she was attractive, but because her mere presence tainted the finely curated scene he had grown used to controlling. Where does she think she is? He said loud enough for 4 surrounding tables to hear. Looks like a coffee shop barista trying to sneak into a gala, someone added. Or an elementary school teacher daydreaming of a better life by peeking at the rich playing chess, another chimed in. Richard smiled, a smile as thin as foil, shiny but cold. She shouldn't be here. But if she wants to learn how this world really works, then she might as well learn from the one running it. He stood up. Every step he took echoed like a signal summoning the audience to a performance that needed no director. Because Richard decided who would be the spectators and who would be dragged onto the stage to have their foolishness stripped bare. The entire room seemed to move with him, whispers spreading like ripples. It's been a while since Richard took an interest in anyone. Looks like another poor soul about to be crushed. I bet she won't last 10 moves. Emma had no idea she was approaching the center of a social chess game, where she had been chosen as the evening's punchline. Richard stopped beside her and spoke, not as a question, but more like a proclamation. Interesting. You seem quite focused. Emma looked up, her gaze calm. Yes, it's very interesting. Do you play? He leaned in, lowering himself to meet her eyes, a tactic he often used with those he considered beneath him. A little, she replied, her voice light, seemingly unaware of the trap being laid around her. Just a little. He smirked, as if he had just heard a child boast about flying an airplane. The crowd murmured knowingly. Those familiar with Richard recognized the signs. This was when he took the stage. I'm Richard Hale, the champion here for 7 straight years, he announced loudly, his eyes sweeping the crowd, reaffirming, I'm still the master of this arena. Emma Carter, she responded briefly, with no awe, no dazzled look. Richard's gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, defaulting to the arrogance ingrained in his nature. It's rare that I get the chance to introduce newcomers to the art of high-level chess. Would you like a lesson? The invitation was sweet as aged wine, but everyone knew it carried the burning sting of mockery. I'm waiting for someone, Emma answered. I promise it won't take long. Just one game. You'll find there's a lot to learn. That last line wasn't meant for Emma. It was for the crowd gathering around, eagerly awaiting the public dismantling of someone not of their kind. Emma glanced around. The faces watching her barely hid their anticipation. She nodded. All right, Mr. Hale. One game. Richard smiled victoriously before a single piece had even moved. He didn't know that the woman sitting before him hadn't come here to learn how to play chess. She had come to teach him what it meant to act like a human being. The chessboard sat under the chandelier's glow like a classic stage set for a performance. Everything was ready. The chess clock wound tight, the crowd encircling like a living wall, and Richard Hale, the admired star, sat behind the black pieces, wearing a faint smile as if preparing to bestow a valuable lesson. Emma Carter sat across from him. No jewelry, no complex expressions, just a straight posture, stillness, and a presence, a kind of aura no one in the room could define, but one that made it impossible to look away. She didn't glance at the crowd, didn't seek affirmation from a single pair of eyes. She simply looked at the board, and with a firm, crisp motion, she pushed her white pawn to e4. No sighs, no opening remarks, just a beginning, as if she were well accustomed to starting things in silence. Richard responded instantly with one, an f6, his usual counterattack meant to unsettle opponents early on. Emma studied the board, her face unchanged. She moved to nc3, a soft yet tight development, as if opening a door Richard hadn't anticipated. For the first time, Richard felt the need to observe more closely. He couldn't see any hesitation in her eyes, the kind he usually spotted and crushed without mercy. Instead, he found an unsettling stillness. Interesting play, Richard remarked, attempting to lighten the atmosphere, or perhaps to ease his own vague discomfort. Emma looked up, her gaze not that of someone trying to challenge him, but of someone who had already been standing there for a long time, without needing anyone's recognition. I believe every move should have a purpose. Otherwise, it's just habit, not art, she replied. Her voice wasn't loud, yet it caused the crowd to fall momentarily silent. Richard gave a soft laugh, but it no longer sounded natural. He pushed a pawn to a5, aiming to seize space on the queen side. Emma reacted immediately. She developed her bishop to bb5, pinning his knight to the king. It was a high-level move, not just tactical, but a clear statement that she understood this battlefield better than anyone standing around watching. Richard leaned back slightly. His fingers spun the chess clock, a familiar habit, but his eyes never left her. Have you played professionally before? His voice carried a note of genuine curiosity now. No sarcasm, no certainty. Emma didn't answer. She simply looked at the board and made another move, as fluid as water flowing over stone. Richard Hale, who had always prided himself on reading his opponents, now realized he couldn't read anything from the woman sitting across from him. She wasn't nervous, wasn't hurried, nor was she seeking approval from anyone. She didn't need to win to prove anything. She was simply playing, as if this board was the only place she ever truly belonged. And that was what disturbed Richard. For the first time in years, he felt a chill at the back of his neck, as if he was facing someone who existed beyond all his familiar definitions. The Black King toppled sideways, cornered with no escape left. Emma Carter gently placed the final piece down as if it were merely another motion from countless habits she had repeated her whole life. Checkmate. Richard Hale froze. His hand remained on the edge of the table, knuckles whitening from gripping too hard. The entire room fell into absolute silence. No one dared to speak, but everyone was holding their breath, waiting for a reaction from the man who had been invincible. Richard stared at the board, his eyes locked on the position of the fallen king, as if he were desperately searching for a mistake a slip, a tactical flaw. But there was none. Everything was precise, ruthless, and undeniable. She had won. He had lost. And that burned him from the inside out. That was unexpected, Richard muttered, but his voice had changed. No longer light. Every word carried a restrained sharpness, like a man who had just been publicly slapped and wasn't allowed to retaliate. Emma didn't respond. She quietly reset the chess pieces, her hand steady as if this were merely another game among countless others she had played. She didn't even look at Richard, and that made him feel more dismissed than any insult ever could. "Would you care for another game?" Richard blurted out. "I don't think one match is enough to judge a person." It wasn't an invitation anymore. It was the desperate challenge of a man whose pride had just been stripped bare in front of a room full of former admirers. Emma looked up at him for the first time since declaring checkmate. Her gaze carried no mockery, no pity. It was simply too calm for Richard to endure. "I think one game is enough, Mr. Hale." Richard let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Or are you afraid? Maybe that first win was just a lucky break? Or you're worried about exposing yourself further?" The crowd flinched. Some frowned. They were used to Richard's coldness, but they had never seen him lose control like this. Emma didn't react immediately. She tilted her head slightly. "If believing that makes you feel better, then go ahead." Her voice was soft as silk, yet each word sliced across Richard's pride like a sharp blade. "I propose." "Another game," Richard interrupted, his voice lower now, not out of humility, but from a desperate attempt to salvage the last shreds of his dignity. "And to make it fair, I want to make a wager." Emma raised an eyebrow. "A wager?" Richard took a deep breath, his eyes slightly bloodshot, the sting of humiliation pushing him toward a dangerous brink. "If I win, you'll tell all of us who you really are, where you trained, and why you've been hiding it." The room buzzed again. "And if I win?" Emma asked, her voice colder now. Richard hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Deep down, he still believed she had just gotten lucky. "What do you want?" Emma leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharpening. No longer the polite guest, but a challenger. "If I win, you will stop using the name Hale and your championship title to belittle anyone here. You will never again turn a stranger into a spectacle for the crowd's amusement." The entire Avalon society seemed to stop breathing. The challenge was no longer about chess. It was about the hidden power dynamics, the way Richard had long used his status to crush others. Richard remained silent for a few seconds, his face flushed with anger, humiliation, and the fact that he had no way to back down. "Deal," he snapped, then sat back down. "This time, I'll play white." The white king was cornered, the black rook commanding the entire board, with no legal moves left. Emma Carter softly uttered two cold words. "Checkmate." Richard Hale sat frozen, his hand resting stiffly on the edge of the table like a stone statue. He didn't look at Emma, nor at the crowd surrounding them. He just stared at the board, as if by looking long enough, the pieces might rearrange themselves into the outcome he desired. But they didn't. Reality did not bend for him, and that truth burned inside him. Not just the sting of losing a game of chess, but the deeper agony of having a part of himself, his pride, his arrogance, his aura of invincibility, stripped bare before everyone. Richard forced a twisted smile, dry and lifeless, and uttered a sentence he himself barely realized he spoke. That was unexpected. His voice was hoarse, every word scraping against his throat. He couldn't bear Emma's calm gaze. Her eyes held no mockery, no pity. They simply existed beyond all the games of power he had ever mastered. Unwilling, unable to swallow it down, he sprang to his feet, adjusted his jacket, and spoke in a voice cold as ice. "Would you like to play another game?" The words no longer carried the polite courtesy of an upper-class gentleman, but the desperate stubbornness of a man who had fallen publicly from his throne. Emma lifted her gaze to him, her eyes so clear, so serene, it deepened the wound in Richard's pride. "I think that's enough, Mr. Hale," she said, her voice soft yet firm, leaving no room for him to salvage his dignity. Richard clenched his teeth. He felt as if the entire room had closed in on him, as if every eye whispered, "Hale has fallen." Hale has lost his crown. He couldn't end it like this. He couldn't walk away from the table as a silent, defeated man. Lowering his voice, he growled through gritted teeth. Or are you afraid? Maybe that first match was just luck. A faint murmur rippled through the crowd. Some frowned. Others looked away, embarrassed for him. But Richard no longer cared. He was too far consumed by the slow-burning fury of wounded pride. Emma studied him for a long moment, her eyes unwavering, unafraid, unpitying, just a frightening calmness. And then she nodded. If you need another game to feel better, I'm willing. That courteous reply pierced Richard's smoldering anger like a cold blade. He slammed back into his seat, his face stiff, voice snapping out like a command. This time, we make a wager. Emma tilted her head slightly. A wager. Richard inhaled deeply, struggling to suppress the rage still bleeding through his clenched teeth. If I win, you'll tell everyone here who you really are, where you studied, and why you've been hiding your identity. The Avalon Chess Society fell into a tense hush. The wealthy, the powerful, those long accustomed to victories and fame, could not hide their curiosity and unease. Emma considered it, then asked, her voice light as the wind. And if I win? Richard hesitated, pressing his lips together. He hadn't prepared for that possibility. He had never even entertained the idea that he might have to pay a price. Emma continued, her gaze sharpening into steel. If I win, you will stop turning others into your playthings in this club. No more humiliating challenges. No more cheap displays of power. You will either play chess like a true gentleman or not at all. A sharp breath escaped from somewhere in the crowd. Someone shook their head. Others took a step back, avoiding standing in the direct line of Richard's growing shame. The entire room seemed to tighten under an invisible pressure. Richard clenched his fists under the table. Deep down, he knew there was no retreat now. He growled, "Deal," and slammed the chess clock with such force. It was as if he thought the gesture alone could silence the storm raging inside him. The chess clock started. Richard Hale moved first, his gaze icy cold, his determination cranked to the extreme. He no longer played like an artist savoring the art. He was fighting like a wounded beast desperate to claw back whatever scraps of dignity he had left. 1 to e4. The powerful opening move was thrust forward like a punch into the air. No patience, no graceful calculation, only the raw instinct and bruised pride of a man cornered. Emma Carter did not rush. She studied the board with a profound, unnerving calm, then gently pushed her pawn to c5, ushering in the complex Sicilian defense. A silent message. She had no intention of yielding. Richard frowned. He launched into attack, as if brute force and speed could somehow shatter her stillness. But Emma didn't react. She didn't need to. She moved her pieces like a master craftsman, every move precise beyond reproach, yet soft enough to mask the ruthlessness hidden beneath. With every passing move, Richard felt a painful truth bleeding steadily into his mind. He wasn't leading this game. He wasn't controlling the pace, wasn't trapping his opponent, wasn't overwhelming her spirit. On the contrary, it was he who was being guided, pushed onto the defensive, forced to react exactly the way Emma intended. And that feeling, for Richard, was 1,000 times worse than mere defeat. The board became a battlefield where every inch he gained was swiftly snared by invisible traps. He pushed his knight forward, aiming to control the center. Emma calmly responded with a pin that strangled his mobility. He tried to launch an assault on the king's side. Emma was already waiting, the sweep of her bishop locking down his weakest flank. Every time Richard thought he had glimpsed an opportunity, Emma quietly slammed the door shut, without a single triumphant gesture. Only silence. Only movement. Time ticked mercilessly. Richard's clock surged into the 13th minute, while Emma's had barely touched 5. The pressure of time, coupled with the slow, gnawing helplessness, drew beads of sweat to his forehead. His expensive dress shirt clung damply to his back. But the worst part wasn't the physical strain. It was the crushing realization that he, Richard Hale, had become small, shrinking before the presence of someone he had dismissed just hours earlier without even bothering to learn her name. Emma pressed her bishop forward with precision. "Check," she said, her voice light as a breeze. Yet to Richard, it rang like a death knell in his ears. He moved his king, but all he could do was run. Every desperate move further unraveled his formation, leaving it even more scattered, brittle, hopeless. He tried to push his rook in a counterattack. Mistake. Emma had been waiting. She swung her knight into a lethal position, sealing his final escape route. Richard stared at the board, stared at the scattered remnants of his army, and knew. There was nothing left. No miracle. No hope. He was losing, clearly, irreversibly, publicly, before the entire Avalon Chess Society. Emma didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't for applause. She made her final move, smooth and unceremonious, then lifted her gaze. Checkmate. 3 short syllables, but enough to shatter forever the illusion that an expensive suit and a golden trophy case could shield a man from the downfall of his own arrogance. Richard Hale sat motionless. There was no anger in his eyes anymore. No excuses. Only the hollow, sorrowful emptiness of a man who realized he had spent his entire life building castles in the sand. Emma quietly reset the chess pieces, each movement as silent as a farewell. She needed no cheers, no validation. She had only come to remind people like Richard that sometimes true greatness walks into the room wearing worn-out soles, not polished Italian leather shoes. The chess clock stopped. The white knight lay still on the board. The battle had ended without the need for a single round of applause. Emma Carter stood up gently, her simple white dress standing out among the sea of black suits and silk ties. No one spoke. No one moved. Not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know what to do in the face of a truth so stark. Their idol had fallen, not before a famous adversary, but before a woman so seemingly ordinary that they once believed she didn't even deserve to set foot here. Richard Hale remained motionless, his hand clenched into a fist beneath the table. His ego had cracked after the first match, and now it had shattered completely. He looked up at Emma, his gaze filled with confusion, bitterness, and a tinge of shame. As much as he longed to say something, anything, to reclaim a shred of dignity, no words came that could withstand the weight of what had just happened. It was at that moment that Dr. Benjamin Clark stepped out from the crowd. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in a deep, clear voice. Perhaps many of you don't realize it yet, but Emma Carter, or rather Emma Bennett, is not the ordinary person you assumed she was. A ripple of shock swept across the room. The faces that had once been cold and judgmental now froze in disbelief. The name, Emma Bennett, echoed in the minds of a few senior members, stirring memories thought long buried. Dr. Clark continued slowly. 20 years ago, she was a chess prodigy, someone the professional world believed would become the youngest world champion in history. She qualified for the international championship at 15, then disappeared the night before the final match. A murmur rose among the crowd. Some of the older members whispered to each other, their expressions shifting from disbelief to reverence. In that instant, all the prejudices against Emma, all the pitying glances, the dismissive whispers, collapsed like a sandcastle under the first heavy rain of summer. Richard looked at Emma, really looked at her, for the first time, not through the lens of arrogance or prejudice. The woman standing before him wasn't some nameless schoolteacher who had stumbled into a lucky win. She was a genius, a soul who had chosen to step away from fame to preserve something far more precious, her pure love for the game of chess. Emma offered a soft smile. No smugness, no arrogance. She had endured far too much to concern herself with recognition from a room full of people who had once scorned her. Richard rose to his feet. His steps no longer bore the confident stride he had when he first entered. He took a deep breath. Perhaps, for the first time in his life, he was learning how to bow his head, not before money nor fame, but before someone whose greatness needed neither to command respect. He approached Emma hesitantly, then spoke in a hoarse voice. "I owe you an apology. I behaved terribly." Emma looked at him, her eyes warm yet unwavering. "You kept your word, and that's enough," she replied softly. The serenity within her was like a mirror, reflecting back every rough edge and hurried judgment of the world around her. Dr. Clark stepped beside Emma. "We received a precious lesson tonight," he said, his gaze sweeping over the entire room. "A lesson about humility, about seeing beyond appearances, and about how a truly great soul never needs to flaunt itself." The entire hall stood still. Those who had once judged her, once sneered at her, could only watch silently now, following Emma Carter's slow, graceful departure from the Avalon Society. Her stride was steady and serene, as if no one had ever mocked her, as if no one had ever tried to make her bow. The heavy wooden door of the Avalon Chess Society creaked shut behind Emma Carter, the sound of the hinges echoing through the silent space like a slow, solemn farewell. Inside, the room remained frozen, like witnesses to a storm that had passed, yet none had begun to gather the shattered fragments of pride left strewn across the floor. No one followed. No one spoke, because they all understood. They hadn't merely lost on the chessboard. They had lost in how they judged others, lost in the blind arrogance they had once proudly hidden beneath expensive suits and framed diplomas. Richard Hale stood silently by the chess table, the very table where just hours ago he had reigned supreme. Now, before him lay scattered pieces, unfinished moves, and a lingering image of a woman who had quietly walked past every prejudice with nothing but her unadorned simplicity. He bowed his head, his hands resting on the cold surface of the table. For the first time in years, he felt neither pride in victory nor bitterness in defeat. Only a haunting question remained. How many times in his life had he passed by people like Emma without ever recognizing their true worth? Dr. Clark stood quietly near the exit, his gaze distant. He knew lessons like tonight's were rare. Lessons about humility. Lessons about respecting the unseen and honoring the uncelebrated. And the lesson is that in a world increasingly clamorous for fame and status, true strength often belongs to those who choose to walk their path in silent resilience. That night, within the tea rooms of Avalon, there were no more heated debates over brilliant chess moves or daring strategies. Instead, there were whispered conversations about the woman in the simple white dress, the one who had defeated Richard Hale without boasting a single word, the one who reminded them all, true intellect never needs to flaunt itself, and real pride never proves itself by trampling others. As for Richard, he returned to his usual table, opening the worn leather notebook where he had once recorded the finest games of his career. But this time, he didn't write down a move. He penned the first line after years of emptiness. The greatest lesson doesn't come from victory. It comes from the moment you dare to admit you once judged someone wrongly. Then he lifted his head, gazing out through the large glass window of the club at the glittering lights of New York City in the night. And somewhere deep within him, for the first time, he felt something strange, a sense of peace. There are victories not measured by silver trophies or roaring applause, but by the profound silence that follows when every mask has fallen away. Emma Carter never needed to prove herself to anyone because her calmness and brilliance etched an unforgettable lesson into the hearts of those who once mocked her. And Richard Hale, like so many who grow accustomed to thrones and titles, had to learn that a person's true worth was never found in status or fame, but in how they face themselves when the applause fades. Today, you might be strong. Today, you might be celebrated. But remember, true greatness isn't about conquering others. It's about overcoming the pride within ourselves. Choose to be someone who can bow before kindness, who can open their heart to the silent, extraordinary things. Because sometimes the greatest souls enter our lives quietly, humbly, and forever change us. With just a game of chess, a single glance, a silent lesson never needing to be spoken aloud. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever been misjudged, endured quietly, and risen by staying true to your real worth, leave a comment. I choose to be great in silence. And if you believe the world needs more stories about humility, silent strength, and unconditional respect. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. So together, we can spread values that never fade. Because sometimes, one simple story is enough to change how someone sees the world forever. This story reminds us of a timeless truth. Never judge a person by appearances. Behind a simple dress, behind worn-out shoes, might lie a brilliance greater than any fame. True greatness doesn't need to flaunt itself. It doesn't need awards to be proven, because real value naturally shines through silent actions. The greatest victory is not when we conquer others, but when we conquer the pride within ourselves. When we learn to bow before kindness and see beyond what the surface allows. I believe the world would be a better place if we all slowed down a little, learned to feel more, and respected the quiet greatness around us. Emma Carter didn't need applause to be great, and neither do you. You don't need the crowd's approval to become the brightest version of yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you believe humility and kindness deserve to be celebrated, leave a comment. I choose humility. Hit like to help us light up the world with these beautiful values. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for Talk Story, where we share soul-stirring journeys that remind us. Sometimes, the most extraordinary things begin from the simplest of places.